Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidire, right here on Salam Media, your home of humanitarian journalism. The time is what? It's 8:37, and we are slowly but surely moving up to the show, and we want you to engage with us. As I mentioned before, our studio line 011-680-0355, WhatsApp line 061-766-0355, and on all our social media platforms you can search at Salam Media, and the show's hashtag is hashtag News and Views. And in a bit, we'll be speaking to research and advocacy officer for Churches Matter, Mbegezile Benjamin, and we'll be unpacking the legacy of outgoing Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Chief Justice Raymond Zondo hung up his green robes yesterday after 27 years on the bench at his final sitting. Former Chief Justice Zondo handed down a judgment in favor of a soldier who had waged a 13-year battle against the SANDF. The unanimous judgment confirmed the soldier's continued service and awarded him outstanding pay with costs. It was a resonant finding for a judge who helped craft South Africa's body of labor law. The final sitting was packed with attendees, including the full bench of his green-robed colleagues, former Justice Mogoeng, Deputy Chief Justice Dihang Moseneke, and former colleagues, including Joanne Kregler, Edwin Cameron, and Zach Yahoob. And we'll be in a bit be joined by Mbegezile, who's joining us virtually, just to unpack, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo's turn as the Chief Justice of South Africa and the role that he played and how he'll be remembered ultimately. Mbegezile, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Always a pleasure chatting to you.
Good morning, Sulailo. Salam alaikum.
Walaikum salam. First and foremost, I think, our point of departure is the role of, Chief Justice in South Africa. I think for the longest time, until state capture started coming to the fore, was one that a lot of South Africans didn't quite understand. What does a Chief Justice really do? We had Chief Justice Mogoeng and then Raymond Zondo, and I think between those two Chief Justices is when we started paying attention on the role of the judiciary in general, in shaping our constitution, and also the role of the Chief Justice itself. How have you seen the role of Chief Justice change with time in South Africa, and the attention that a lot of South Africans started giving to the role and some of the responsibilities that it has?
Yeah, you're quite right. The role of Chief Justice was not really a public role. A lot of people didn't even know who the Chief Justice was. And in fact, from 1994, the Chief Justice was really responsible for running the Constitutional Court. That is the job that they were concerned about. They all they did was care for their judgments and making sure that the judgments are delivered on time. But over time, over the last 30 years, the role has evolved. It has become a lot bigger. It has taken on more responsibilities, particularly in the last 10 years, where the Constitution was actually amended to say that the Chief Justice is fully the head of the judiciary. That means the Chief Justice is responsible for running all the courts in the country, all the judicial officers from the magistrates court in the smallest town to the Constitutional Court. They all fall under the Chief Justice. But it has also assumed a more public role in the sense that the Chief Justice is now recognized as the head of the third arm of the state, alongside the President and the Speaker of the National Assembly. They head up the different arms of state. And so the Chief Justice has become much more involved in the public sphere. We see the Chief Justice leading the delegation at the opening of Parliament, swearing in new members, presiding over the sitting of Parliament. All of those public roles are things that are now encompassed as part of the roles and responsibilities of the Chief Justice.
I want us now to, come to, former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo's turn, as the head of South Africa's judiciary. It was one that I think is probably the most famous Chief Justice we've had, considering the circumstances. State Capture Commission, obviously being, the headliner there. But, if you can just encapsulate the legacy of former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, he was sworn in, I think, around 2 years ago, 2022, by President Cyril Ramaphosa. What can we make of his legacy and the impact that he's had on South Africa's judiciary through that time, as the head?
Yes, so Chief Justice Zondo I think, was the most famous Chief Justice in our country. But that is probably because of the state capture related work. But that is actually not even part of the primary role of the Chief Justice. It sort of came as an unusual circumstance. But really, to zoom in on his role as the Chief Justice in the last 2 years, his legacy is really on how, over the length of his time as a judge, he has developed labor law. He has really focused on getting the principles in place. He actually was involved in 1995 in drafting the Labor Relations Act, which is the primary law that governs labor law. And over the next 30 years, he worked to sort of make sense of those principles up to even the last day. As you mentioned, he dealt with a case involving a soldier, an employee who was fired from the defense force, and he ordered that that employee was reinstated. So I think that is his most enduring legacy, his contribution to labor law. But in the last 2 years as Chief Justice, he's also been the chairperson of the Judicial Service Commission, which I think is also his legacy project. He worked over the last 3 years to transform the JSC to be more focused on the role of finding good lawyers to become good judges in our courts, and also making sure that candidates who come to the JSC for interviews are treated with dignity and respect, which is something that was a big problem we as civil society had been complaining about. The other aspect is, of course, we now know that there's written criteria for how you become a judge, which is something that, as Judges Matter, we did some research on to show that it was a key weakness in the process. And Justice Zondo led that process to adopt the criteria, and that was important. The last point, maybe to flag on his legacy, is how he was instrumental in bringing in more women to the judiciary. As early as the early 2000s, he gave judges like the incoming Chief Justice Mandi Samaya an opportunity to be acting judges at the Labour Court, which gave them really their first opportunity to preside over cases and to sort of cut their teeth in the judicial function. And later on, many of those women became judges of the different courts. A significant number actually today is sitting as justices of the Constitutional Court. And so that is something that Justice Zondo can take as a legacy, as something that he made a significant contribution towards.
And I think you mentioned quite a few contributions that former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo made in the judiciary here in South Africa, but the one that will always be a highlight will be obviously that Zondo Commission. Do you think in any way the role that he played in that state capture commission will affect his legacy? I think for the longest time you had criticism coming from all spheres about whether or not he overstepped his role. Some of the opinions that he had, were they political or were they based on real, judiciary commentating? Do you think was it a moment that broke or made his legacy, the State Capture Commission?
I think the State Capture Commission was a big chunk of his legacy. That is something that we cannot take away from him. And in fact, we should celebrate that the fact that he stood up at a time when our country was facing a crisis in terms of state capture and corruption. And there was this big commission that was set up. And we heard from Chief Justice Mogoeng that Zondo wasn't even the first choice. He was a reluctant candidate for this position, but he stepped up because he realized that it was a task that needed to be done. And so he sort of became a patriot in standing up and doing the state capture related work. And of course, the legacy of that state capture commission is being implemented as we speak. We heard from Advocate Shamila Batoyi that they are already implementing the recommendations. The independent directorate or is now a standalone part of the National Prosecuting Authority, and it will focus on many of the cases that came from the Zondo Commission. So that is a testament to his legacy. But of course, the State Capture Commission ended in 2022, and we expected that Justice Zondo will now focus fully on the role of Chief Justice. That didn't really need to involve the role of the State Capture Commission. And that is where we think we needed to criticize him on, because there was a bit of a blurring of the lines at some point where you couldn't really tell whether he was speaking as Chief Justice and the head of our judiciary, or he was speaking as the chairperson of the State Capture Commission. It is important that those roles are separated, because they are really, really separate, and it really is different roles and functions. And so we would have appreciated Chief Justice Zondo to sort of step back a bit and not be so vocal on some of the state capture related issues after the commission had ended. But overall, we could give him his credit for doing good service to South Africa, and we hope that the lessons from the State Capture Commission will be learned, and his legacy will live on in the tangible outcomes from that process.
South Africans like to compare. We like to compare precedents. We like to compare, generations of football clubs. We're like that. When it comes to, the former Chief Justice Zondo, how does his legacy compare with some of his predecessors in terms of judicial leadership and contributions to the rule of law in South Africa?
Well, it's very difficult to compare chief justices. In fact, we usually say a chief justice is made for a moment, because each one has very unique circumstances that they face, and usually they will have to carry out their functions in a way that in many ways is unprecedented from his predecessors. So again, Justice Zondo was serving a limited period, right? He served just over 2 years as a Chief Justice, and maybe a little bit of a year as acting Chief Justice. And during that time, we of course were in a really difficult period politically. You'll recall there was very harsh criticism against the judiciary. There were allegations that it was captured. Even a former minister came out to criticize the judiciary unfairly so. And so Justice Zondo was called to step up and defend the judiciary. And we can give him credit again for what he did in speaking out on behalf of the judiciary, for challenging people to present evidence if they make allegations of capture of judges or the judiciary. And that was important because not only did it defend the integrity of the judiciary, but it also gave confidence to judges in our courts, because they now saw that their leader was leading from the front and was defending their own integrity. And that really was important, and I think it's something that would be a unique part of Justice Zondo's role as Chief Justice. Of course, he also was able to organize the first judges conference in a decade. And that is something that judges had been long calling for, and it hadn't happened. And he managed to get that done. And so even internally within the judiciary, he will be remembered quite fondly as a leader who was really made for the moment as a Chief Justice.
I want us now to throw forward to the future a bit. Next week, South Africa will be having its first female Chief Justice, Mandisa Maya. For those that don't know her, just a brief profile on her, and some of the work that she's done before, being nominated and ultimately being selected as the next Chief Justice to take over from former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Is she a character that we can say is going to take us a bit further and take the judiciary, South Africa's judiciary, that we're so proud of, and it's such a prized institution in the country, to the next level?
Yeah, we have no doubt that she will take the judiciary to the next level. So Justice Maya was born in a small village called Tsolo in the Eastern Cape, and she rose through the ranks really of the legal profession and the judiciary. She started off as a judge in the Mthatha High Court, and later she became a judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal, later becoming a deputy and president and deputy president and later president of the Supreme Court of Appeal. In both of those roles, she was the first woman to hold those positions, and in fact, she was credited with transforming that court, bringing in more black judges, more women judges, to the point where currently the Supreme Court of Appeal is probably one of the few courts that have a majority woman bench. But at the same time as transforming the court, she managed to make sure that the court performs at the very high level. It is still, at the time that she was the president, it was the top performing court in the country. Even now, today, 2 years later, after she has left the position, it is still the top performing court in the country. So she brings with her more than 20 years of experience in the judiciary, but also a proven track record in leadership. And that, I think, is the most important part, because right now our judiciary does need strong leadership. We are facing a bit of a crisis, particularly in the Gauteng High Court, for example, where we have too few judges for the current workload that court faces. But also nationally, we just don't have enough judges. And so we expect the Chief Justice to put that as a priority, to demand many more judges for our courts. But also, even as she comes in, there were certain things that Justice Zondo was not able to finish. One of those projects was the administration of the courts. It has been a long debated issue, and last year Justice Zondo even organized meetings with the president to try and get that issue resolved. It has not yet been resolved, and so we expect Justice Maya to lead from the front even on that issue, to resolve the issue so that the courts are able to function properly, so that people are able to see justice move much faster than we currently see. So we have high expectations of her. Of course, we support her. We are excited that we have a first woman as Chief Justice, but we also are committing to hold her accountable in the role of Chief Justice.
One of the key issues that I think she has already had to face before even, officially being Chief Justice is the issue of the Judicial Service Commission. The criticism that there are a lot of politicians serving on that commission, and the selecting of judges. How do you think she should be handling this issue? And just your thoughts, as an organization, as Judges Matter, on the composition of the JSC, and politicians ultimately picking and choosing the judiciary. How should she be tackling this, and your thought on that criticism that politicians shouldn't be given that much power, and the composition of politicians just too much when it comes to the JSC?
So yeah, the composition of the JSC is a hot topic in the public realm, and we should really be debating it. It's healthy that we're debating it. But from our standpoint as Judges Matter, we are not really concerned actually that we have politicians or members of parliament on the JSC, because they are sent by parliament. They are sent by the people's the people's house to be people's representative on the JSC. So they are the eyes and ears of the ordinary people who use the courts. And so when they sit on the JSC, they must let go of their party affiliation, they must let go of their politics. But what they are there to do is to represent the interests of the members of the public, because we don't want actually a situation where judges are only appointed by judges or lawyers, because that also has its own problems. So in fact, South Africa, if you look at globally, when you look at how the appointments process for judges works, South Africa is a really, really good model, because on one extreme we have the model in the United States where only politicians are involved in the appointment of judges, and that has its own problems. In India, it's only judges who are involved. That has its own problems, because there, if you are a poor person from a low caste in India, you can never aspire to be a judge, and you can never be a judge, because it has become an elite institution because it only is the judges and the sons of judges who become judges themselves. And so it is a big problem in that country. So South Africa is sort of in the middle. We have half of our JSC made up of lawyers and judges, and a little under half actually is made up of politicians. And it's really important for the legitimacy of our judiciary for there to be public representatives who will represent the interests of court users in the system. And so we as an organization are not entirely are opposed to members of parliament being in that judicial service commission. What we expect, though, is that they will behave. We expect them to be focused on the real issues that concern South Africans and affect their access to justice, and they should ask questions that really elevate the issues and the concerns of South Africans. That is what we expect them to do, and that is the mandate that they should carry it out. But coming back to Justice Maya, so we expect that she will obviously defend the integrity of the JSC and speak and explain why it has come to be that the JSC is composed in this way, because it is also part of the Constitution. But another aspect of Justice Maya's character is that, unlike Justice Zondo and Justice Mogoeng, for example, she doesn't really like being in the media spotlight that much. She doesn't even like her picture being taken. So we expect her to become a media shy Chief Justice. We expect her to go back to sort of the traditional role of the Chief Justice, being only concerned with the running of the courts and less so being involved in the public arena. And that is something that I think is both good in terms of her focus on the judiciary, but it might not be so good when it comes to having to step up and defend the integrity of the judiciary, because at a certain point, just like we've seen with Justice Zondo, you do need to come out and defend the integrity of the judiciary.
I can tell you for free, it's not good. We're now used to celebrity chief justices. We're going to leave it there, Begezile. Thank you so much for giving us your time and giving us, really, really, interesting insights on the legacy of outgoing Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. And I'm sure as Justice Maya, and starts her term, I will also be chatting to you just to dissect some of the major decisions that she'll be taking and how she'll be running that very, very prized institution, which is our judiciary. But we're going to leave it here for now. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Begezile Benjamin, Research and Advocacy Officer for Judges Matter, giving us the lowdown on the legacy of outgoing Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, and just throwing forward a bit to the incoming Chief Justice Maya, who's going to be the first female Chief Justice that South Africa has ever had, Mandisa Maya. And as you mentioned there, she's not quite the celebrity Chief Justice as we've been accustomed to in the last 10 years with Chief Justice Mogoeng, very, very outspoken, very, very vocal, not camera shy. Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, I think kind of similar, always ready to engage interviews, speaks his mind, but I think at some point the lines were blurred, especially when it comes to the Zondo Commission and how one couldn't tell at what point was he giving commentary on some of the legal issues as the Chief Justice or as head of the Zondo Commission, which as you heard, these are two very, very separate institutions, and he was different caps that he was wearing with the two. So it's going to be a really interesting 10 years. For the next 10 years, Chief Justice Maya, the first female Chief Justice that South Africa has ever heard, which I think is something that we need to celebrate very, very loudly, that we have the head of a judiciary, one of the most prized institutions of South Africa, being headed by a female for the first time. And for the first time, in South Africa's history, we'll be having a female at the helm, and for the next 10 years she'll be the one that's going to be in charge of the courts, the constitution, and some of the major key issues, whether in parliament or the electoral court, you name it. Chief Justice Maya will be at the helm, and it will be very interesting. We'll be looking at her with a microscope because of a really, I could say, an 80% score that I could give Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. I think he played a really good role and at a very critical point in South Africa's history, with the Zondo Commission, state capture being, the order of the day. But he's done now, and it should be another interesting couple of years with Chief Justice Maya at the helm. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be speaking to Roshan Dadu, and we'll be speaking on that really interesting conversation that we had about calls for Glencore to stop fueling the genocide by, doing business with the Zionists, the Israeli occupying forces, and selling them South Africa's coal. While on the other hand, South Africa is head and shoulders above all the other countries, in the world when it comes to Palestinian activism and speaking out against the genocide that's currently ongoing. So SAPDS coalition representative Roshan Dadu will be joining us after this short break.